on Plato's Apology. Socrates starts out, there's a lot in just the first three sentences here. I do not know, men of Athens, how my accusers affected you. As for me, I was almost carried away, in spite of myself. So persuasively did they speak, and yet hardly anything of what they said is true. So, what we get here from the beginning, fundamental in philosophy, is this distinction between persuasion and truth. What people are persuaded of and what's true. And all of a sudden, lots and lots of questions and issues and puzzles arise. How do we know what's true? The short story with that is by thinking about it and discussing it. The details of that, philosophy in here, is by adducing arguments or putting together arguments to try to find conclusions that one can sort of hang their hat on, so to speak. And Socrates does that and introduces that in different ways in the Apology here. But that's really something to think about in the context here. We're introduced to the idea of rhetoricians, or teachers of rhetoric, sophists, they're sometimes called. Those being the same thing. Again, teachers of rhetoric and persuasion is the way it's typically described. And the way Socrates distinguishes himself and philosophy from rhetoric is that it's about trying to find the truth as opposed to trying to convince people of things. And convince people of things by so-called rhetorical tricks, by appealing to their motivations, insecurities in different ways, shapes and forms. Some other important things here in the Apology. We get this basic background of what Socrates is and what's going on. He's on trial, by the way, and he's sentenced to death here. So this is a grave matter, a serious matter, and something that, despite the title, he's really not apologetic for. He rather kind of eggs things on. If you look at it and look at the details. So he talks about what he does in his life, and that's to think about. I think, in a word, what it is to live a good life, what it is to be good, what it is to be wise, and he suggests that this is what's important, and material things, social success, monetary success, reputation, those things that people typically strive for and maybe are fully driven towards, is not the way to live one's life. At one point, Socrates says, this is no mean question that I ask, but how to live your life. It's everybody's question. We don't get to hear, unfortunately, I think, the charges that have been raised against Socrates, but we hear his defenses. And pictured on the screen here is some of that. And examining that is what Socrates, Plato invite us to do with respect to what's going on here. There's a ton of other really interesting claims, and find something pretty interesting, I think, to think about on each page. Really, surely many of them. For example, he argues that an honest person can't survive in politics for very long at all. Now, that rings true for a lot of people, perhaps even taken too much to an extreme, where we get people dissociating entirely from politics and not believing anything anybody says in or about politics. I suppose in the worst form, what we get is people believing certain things in politics, and dismissing others without any basis for doing so. It seems to be a modern thing a bit. I'm sure in some sense it's always been around. So I think that's probably good in terms of an introduction. A couple other things that I thought I'd mention quickly. He talks about death, what one should think about death, and offers this, again, super interesting and debatable claim. Well, death is either sort of a deep sleep, nothing, or if you're a good person, a reward. And so either way, there's nothing to fear.